Okay, our next interview is with John Durham of Bolerium Books at, I think it's 2141 Mission.
That's right.
Up on the floor with a number of other booksellers. John, why don't you take us through your early years growing up, brothers, sisters, what your parents did, how you got interested in books, and bring us up sort of through your college years.
Okay, well, I'm actually a preacher's kid. My father was a Methodist minister. When I first started growing up, I was in Nashville, Tennessee, between 52 and 62. We now believe that they may have left Nashville because he actually, as a white minister, signed some public statements in support of civil rights. And naturally, 1962 is when things started getting really, really rough. In 1962, the family, with a younger brother and sister, moved out here, and he took over Glide Church down in the Tenderloin, and he ran basically the foundation. The church was controlled by a foundation, Glide Church, from 1962 to 72, which were very exciting years. The church at that point, the very first step they made in 1962 is they wanted to appeal to the local community. So one of the ministers, fortunately my father never actually preached because he was really bad, did an over-the-fold sermon that made it into the Chronicle, or they published it in the headlines, over the fold for homosexual rights. And so the church was one of the first groups to campaign for gay rights. They also later were involved in the Haight-Ashbury experience. They had close relationships to the Diggers. We lived right near the Human Beings, which I went to. So it's a very, very exciting time. You went from Diggers to one point he was consulting for the Navy on drug abuse. We were never quite sure whether it was pro or con. In fact, we later found out he got the job with the Navy because they sat down with a bong after the official interview. So he went from that to Speed Freaks to Diggers to a lot of interesting characters we were exposed to between 62 and 72. I left for college in 1970. And as a way of revolting against my parents, I gave up drugs. And got involved in activities for world revolution. Now, I have also a younger brother and a sister. His sister currently runs a small vineyard, 6-7 acres up in Upper Lake, with a former roommate of mine that she married, mostly because he always did the dishes. And a younger brother who's perfectly normal, which you've never figured out quite what happened.
Yeah. Sure it's your brother?
We're not completely sure. There was a period when we were absolutely sure, but we're not going to go into that on tape.
Okay.
So basically, it was a real exciting upbringing. Then I got involved in the 70s. It was in a period where there's a lot of political activity in America that people tend to forget about, because I got involved in the anti-war movement, doing fundraising for the anti-war movement. I worked in some of the early fundraising operations for the big anti-war demonstrations. I joined what was the mainline Trotskyist group, which is also how I got into book selling, was through Trotskyism. And basically from there I did the fundraising for them, and I worked in a number of different social movements. And at one point I was even, for a short period, a paid outside agitator. In case any of you young ones out there are wondering, the pay is terrible, and the conditions not much better.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Nor were we particularly successful.
Talk a little bit more about Trotskyism that got you in the book business.
Well, for the party, basically, we do a lot of different things. They had a big branch office. In the 70s, they had maybe in the Bay Area 100 to 200 members. Now, this sounds small, but this is basically what you would know as a cadre organization. There were weekly meetings. You were active. They could basically, if they needed to, with a fairly short notice, mobilize 100, 200, 300 people to do something. Wow. So it had a really big impact. For instance, with the Labor Council here and the labor movement, we worked with them on a Sears strike, and the head of the union, later the head of the Labor Council, never forgot the party because they were able to really bring out the numbers to augment the strike and help basically win the strike with Sears. So it was an important experience of working with people and developing teamwork. And then one of the things any good political group does is it has a bookstore. So I was assigned partially to work on the bookstore since I was a student and actually knew something about the literature. And then from that, I got more interested in doing the books with them and doing the bookstore. And then, as a lot of cadre groups did, between basically 80 to 91, when the Communist Party blew up in a big split, basically ran into serious problems. The world revolution wasn't going to happen right away. The organizational structures were unsuited for what was going on, and basically most of the groups imploded, to make a long story short, including the one I was in, which was becoming fairly obvious. And they were trying to get everybody to become proletarianized. I even went so far as to learn welding, well, attempt to learn welding. It was the upside of learning welding is I lived in the Castro at the time, so I'd walk in the full leather apron and helmet through the Castro with the whole welding uniform, which made me highly popular.
Yeah, I would imagine.
But the actual fact of welding and dealing with a hot flame and a clumsy welder, me, was more problematic, and I could see it was not going to be my future. So with a group, because that's all the things you do, always do in the movement, is you try to have a group of people. I founded Bolerium in 1981, as when I was still in the party, but it was clear it was going south.
At the same address on Mission?
No, we were started in a former partner's home in 1981. There were 5 of us. That was a serious, serious business mistake. Never start a book business with 5 partners. That is very wrong. I found that out over the course of 10 years. And most of the partners are no longer in the book business. They were never really that interested in the book business. Only one who was very, very interested is actually a former partner, is now the head of the Fair Committee, Michael Hackenberg. We were partners between 81 and 90 and had a very friendly breakup of the partnership. It actually took us, I think, 2 or 3 hours to divide the assets.
Yeah, that sounds pretty friendly.
Yeah, it was friendly, and we both continue. We do very different types of books because he's more classical studies, scholarly books. I'm more social movements, gay literature, Chicano literature, all sorts of things.
Women.
Yeah, women. Right. Anything but straight, rich white males.
Talk a little bit about your current partner.
Well, actually. Mike decided he wanted to partially retire. He joined in 1990. And so while he is still working at the bookstore, he's actually no longer a partner.
I see.
He's still employed and on payroll. Last I saw an hour ago, he was still at the book fair.
That's a good sign.
Yeah, I mean, no, it took longer to negotiate, but we reached a reasonable solution for both of us. Basically, he wanted to be able to disappear for a month at a time, take a trip, go around the world and do something. If you're in the book business, that's a serious problem.
Yeah, I would think so.
But he actually added a lot to the business. I mean, Mike came also, like I did, from a left background, a different political tendency. He was in the Democratic Socialists. Originally started out around the general left and SDS, looked at the Weather Underground tendency, realized they were Meshuggah, and went with the left-wing NAM, which was the New American Movement, and the left-wing Social Democrats. So he added a lot in terms of knowledge to the business, in terms of covering all the left, in terms of helping really develop a strong gay section and a strong African-American presence and section. Because a lot of what we do involves a lot of very specialized knowledge.
How many volumes do you have upstairs in the shop?
We have roughly 62,000 titles online. We have a storeroom with about 800 or 900 square feet of unprocessed material. And we have a number of titles. We have a large number of duplicates. But I would say you could safely say a minimum of 80,000, 90,000.
Wow. What percentage of your business is with privates, with dealers, and with institutions? Can you break it down?
Only
approximately.
Only very roughly. Approximate. I mean, dealers is actually the smallest percent of our business. That's like maybe 8 to 10%. Partially because we are seen sometimes, I think, somewhat correctly at times in some areas as kind of a terminus point. You know, we may be inexpensive, but there's really no further to go, and they don't know who the customers are.
Yeah.
You know, if you're buying Communist Party materials from us, there's a good chance you're going to find them. They're going to be very hard to sell.
Yeah.
Because we really actually do know the customers and what to do with the sellable ones. There's a lot of unsellable ones.
To be said of any subject matter.
Exactly. So that's maybe a small percentage. We're dealer friendly, but it's still always going to be a small percentage. And a lot of the dealer sales, or we sell stuff that's out of area, like one of the big ticket things we sold this week, for instance, at the fair was a Mormon piece from 1860 something by Lucy Smith, her biography of Joseph Smith, which was done in England, which desperately needed to get out of the booth for a variety of reasons.
I'm sure. Yeah, sure. Not the book that you want in your booth, I don't think.
We didn't mind it, but it really didn't fit, and it's unlikely a true Mormon collector would be comfortable buying from us.
Probably not. Talk a little bit about some of the people who were your mentors or people who you respected and learned from.
Well, I mean, there's a wide... The dealers in left stuff is a very small field. I mean, basically, it's mostly, until recently, mostly non-ABAA members. There's a bibliomania in the East Bay that I learned a lot from. David Sachs, who's a longtime scout, also for Peter Howard. And those two I learned a lot from. The others were more contemporaneous with me. I learned something from them, but they probably learned something from me. In terms of dealers here, everybody from, say, a Howard Carno in Latin American studies I learned a fair hunk from, to Ed Glazer, of course, who everybody around here knows.
Yeah. He's a great guy, and a great bookseller and a great person.
Exactly. To, you know, one of the great local ABAA colorful members that taught me the joys of publicity would be Everett Cunningham.
Well, he was a one-timer. There's nobody ever going to be like him.
Yeah, I've never quite had the cojones to dress up as a Viking in an ABAA book fair.
Yeah, or Uncle Sam.
Yeah, he did Uncle Sam too.
Yeah.
He did
World War I aviator.
Yeah,
I remember that, and I also remember that he had drawn a booth next to Warren Howell, and he came in his aviator's uniform, and Warren stood there and looked at him and looked at him and looked at him and just couldn't make any sense out of this person.
Oh no, Everett was like one of those things. He realized when you saw his booth at an ABAA fair, you know you were going to be fine.
Oh yeah,
it was.
Yeah, he had great stuff cheap.
Yeah, and cheap is the.
Yeah, cheap. Do you know that when he died, he willed his building to the ABAA?
Yeah.
And they sold the building, and I guess I don't know what happened to the money, but I thought that was kind of like special.
Well, Everett loved it was a group that actually accepted him for all his eccentricities, because the local chapter, when I was put him on the board, something I don't think Northern California has ever been forgiven for.
Well, probably not. He had a lot of good ideas.
Yeah, he had a lot of good ideas. He had fun, and he enjoyed the business. He had fun. I mean, he did all sorts of eccentric things. Like one of the things I want to learn from him is the time he got audited. He showed up for the audit with a hand truck with 4 or 5 boxes of old records, some of which were his.
He was an incredible character.
No, he was one of the great characters you could really learn from. One of the things I kind of learned from him is that actually being eccentric in the trade is useful. Is that fundamentally, if you look at the book trade, there's a lot of eccentrics in it because it's actually economically useful to be a little different. Yeah. That one of the things is if you're too normal, nobody remembers you. If your books are too normal, it can be a real problem. You're not memorable. It is hard for, except for the few 20 people, 30 people, you can develop a relationship. They're not going to remember you and come when they have a collection.
Right.
Well, if you're off the right way, you're going to get a lot of PR. I mean, in our case, it's worked out well. I mean, recently we were featured, although we shouldn't have been because we weren't really part of the article, in the New York Times did a travel thing on Litquake, which is a local literary thing in San Francisco, partially centered in the Mission District where we are, which the stores had absolutely nothing to do with, I might note.
Really?
But they put a whole section on Bolerium in there just because, well, we're colorful.
Yeah, that you are.
You know, they put a nice picture of our sacred text section in there. For those who are wondering, that's Marx, Engels, and Lenin.
No Trotsky?
No, it's a separate section. I got to be careful with the customers. They have a lot of political sensibilities I have to navigate.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I mean, we always kind of push the edge, like we do the Anarchist Book Fair every year. And one year, one of our guys, we had all these odd volumes of bad sets of linen. There is an argument that all sets of linen are bad, but we'll save that for later. So we decided, well, we're going to have to get rid of them. We took them to the Anarchist Book Fair. This, of course, is a problem because anarchists hate linen.
Yeah.
So what we did is we put up a big sign, linen liquidation sale, and sold them for $1 each. We sold 160 of them.
Wow.
Otherwise useless, utterly useless volumes of linen.
At the Anarchist Book Fair?
At the Anarchist Book Fair.
That sounds like a really good time for all you anarchists.
Well, I don't know why they let me in. I've never told them I was an anarchist.
Yeah, no.
I'm not, actually.
No, maybe they suspect you are.
Maybe. Well, there's not that many left. There's so few left book dealers of our sort that you can't really afford, as long as I'm not obnoxious about it.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about some of the younger people who are coming into the trade the last few years. Is there you see any rising stars there?
Well, I mean, there's a guy in left-wing books, Lauren Baer. You know, he's not that much younger. He's probably in his late 40s. Mm-hmm. I could be wrong. He does look young, but you know, and he's trying to do the labor stuff upscale, which is going to be a hard road to do because there's not a lot of. I know the customer base. There are not a lot of rich customers. They tend to be school teachers, or you know, in best case scenarios, they're a professor, usually without tenure. So it's going to be long. I mean, there is also Division Leap, and they are actually really young.
I was going to ask you about him.
Oh yeah, Adam and Kate, they're really good.
They're cool people.
Yeah, they're good. They're going after this whole mimeograph, this whole zine, because after my period, there's this whole zine revolution in the punk period in the late 80s and 90s, something which I actually never
Explain
collected.
what a zine is
For the old farts?
Yep.
Or for the really young ones? It's for both.
Either or.
Yeah, zine is basically a self-published magazine, usually Xerox and stapled, usually mildly incoherent because it's really written for yourself. And during the punk period, which is right before the internet revolution, blogging took place. There was a whole explosion of zines and zine fairs, and often related to the punk music. And it's kind of like post the end, because by the 81, 82, you're getting the tail end where the left is basically dying, the hard left, unfortunately.
Talk a little bit about your experiences with Internet. Do you have a presence? Are you an Internet person, or do you have somebody else do it for you?
Yes.
All of the above.
All of the above. We do, the Internet changed everything, because it used to be we'd issue catalogs. I could sell fairly common books in catalogs because there was no other way for somebody interested in that specialty to easily assess them. It might be one copy for every 20 bookstores you could find on a regular basis, but very few people had the stamina to go to 20 used bookstores.
Right.
So the Internet killed that whole section of the business. In our case, it killed print catalogs. So our stuff is not expensive, by and large. We have expensive books, of course. We are in the ABAA. But
you also didn't you just issue a catalog on labor?
No,
2 years
we
ago?
only do it. We haven't done a catalog on labor for like 8 years.
Well, I'm really up to date on that.
Yeah, I mean, what it is, is we lost like 30% of the audience, and you lost the inexpensive stuff you could sell. And it became clear that if I wanted to continue selling $12 or $15 or $20 pamphlets, I had to sell them a different way. Because the print costs and the mailing costs would cost us like $5,000 to put out a catalog, and the economics just became very difficult with the catalog.
That's crazy.
So what we've done is instead look at the internet and figure out how can we make it work for us. That you really have to look, you're not going to stop the tide from coming in and going out. You're not going to stop the internet from changing the business. It's useless to worry about that. So what we've done is basically, besides have our own website and list on the major services, which we sell a lot on, is we figured out how to get our website to send out emails to basically everybody on topics they're interested in. So if somebody's just interested in labor, we send them a list on labor only, what's new, or our gay pulps, or only gay pulps in North Carolina. We'll send them a list. Automatically, one of the great things about the internet and the computers is now you can do things like quoting automatically by topic area. So we've really stepped up that. So every Thursday morning we come in, we've uploaded all our new stuff, and we usually have a batch of orders and typically sell like 20% of everything new we catalog.
That's great.
Sometimes more.
It certainly is great.
So,
we've got a few more minutes, and then I'm going to let you go. But what do you think about the economic world that we are living in and have been living in? Do you feel that it makes it tough for someone who wants to be a bookseller?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's really a different world. The barriers to entry are lower. If you look at it economically, when I started, the big barrier was going out and finding the customers. Now, the good thing when I started, the institutions had money. Mm-hmm. So I basically do a lot of institutional and library business. The bad thing is it's hard to reach individuals, and it was expensive. We bought mailing lists. We did advertising. Now you can go out and you can list on Amazon or ABAA, and the customers find you.
Right.
Now, a lot of the newbie dealers have gotten very lazy. It's all one-off for them, and they don't know what to do with the information. Mm. They don't know how to develop a customer base, how to quote. The idea of quoting is foreign to their very...
Sometimes I don't even understand what you're talking about.
Exactly. I've had that happen. I don't bother to explain it.
Well, you ought to.
I know.
Just so that they'll have some basis for not having to ask that question again.
There is that.
Let me ask you for the last question. What do you see are the greatest challenges for the antiquarian book trade as we move forward into the next decade?
Well, I think one of the challenges is going to be is there's been a deflation in kind of common book prices. One of the challenges, I think, for attracting new collectors is simply price, is money. Mm-hmm. That a lot of the collecting areas are fully priced. That, if somebody goes in and they see a book for $5,000 they really love, it can't be collected, because wages in America and incomes have been flat for the last 10 years, and they're not going up. Yeah. So there's a real question of what economists would call effective demand. Are there people really, not just that want the books, but really willing to pay those prices? So I think to some extent the trade has gotten too expensive for its own good. And then that makes it more difficult. I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that, and that's not to cast any blame at those that are at the higher price. Yeah. But it is a problem. And it's one of the things that we've done with our areas. There's a lot of areas you can collect that are really not that expensive. Right. I mean, say if you decide to collect a history of AIDS, the pamphlets and leaflets for the AIDS epidemic, they're only 100 to 200 from us, and often you can find them cheaper if you look. Yeah. It'll be hard, but you can do it.
All right, John. Thanks very much for 30 minutes to John Durham at Bolerium Books.